Hi, welcome back, listeners, to the Fraud Technology podcast. And today we have somebody with almost 2 decades of experience working in different domains within the financial services, and in the last 10 years working in the fraud space itself. And that is Chris Dennis. Currently, he's at MasterCard, but he has a ton of experience coming from different companies as well. So, welcome, Chris, to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you here as well. So first, I would like to probably start with I would love to understand how your career shaped up into and finally going into fraud itself. How did that journey happen?
Yeah, so my journey starts back in college. So I went to college, graduated in criminal justice with an interest or passion of
Mm,
understanding, criminal behavior.
mm,
I moved into
mm,
law enforcement, spent 7 years in law enforcement. So
mm,
my
mm,
I somewhat solidified my background there, just understanding,
mm,
the mechanisms of honestly how to
mm,
how to talk to people in the
mm,
way that you're helping to
mm,
draw out information about suspicious
mm,
activity. Um,
mm,
I moved into banking after about 9 years,
mm,
and my role started as many do early in their careers. I started in a call center, and in the call
mm,
center, I was taking calls, talking to customers about authorization activity, and did you authorize a charge, and this is you,
mm,
and verifying
mm,
that you are who you say you are. And then,
mm,
I was very fortunate. I progressed in my career into management roles,
mm,
and then from a management perspective, I had the opportunity to oversee analytics, specialty operations, which included identity theft, account takeover, any money movement
mm,
like ACH wires, bill pay, P2P. Um,
mm,
and then
mm,
I was fortunate. I was speaking at a conference, and at that conference, at the conclusion of it, one of the hosts had approached me and asked if I'd be interested in an opportunity working for a fraud technology company. And again, I'd always been on the issuer side, but I thought it was a
mm,
good fit for me to try to expand my experience. I was
mm.
a little reluctant because I didn't really have
Wow.
sales
Mm,
background. So I was a little bit
mm,
fearful, a little bit tentative, but I was super fortunate and glad that I did it, because it
mm,
opened up so many new doors to new people, and different fraud experiences that were far beyond
mm,
just what issuers experience.
mm,
Then,
mm,
ironically, about 3.5 years later, a former coworker of mine was working where I am today and had called
mm,
and reached out to me and said, "Hey, listen, we're looking for some people. Would you be interested?" So again, by building
mm,
that network of folks and staying close to individuals in the industry that go to different companies, that's one of the ways that you
mm,
can find your career takes you, is depending upon the relationship you've built over time. So
mm,
I'm so glad that I did. I came over to MasterCard, and I've been
mm,
really
mm.
enjoying the type of work that we'll talk about a little bit today, but really enjoying the work that I do and how we help our customers and clients.
Awesome,
So,
awesome. So, I mean, wow, I was fascinated with being in a conference and actually you're part of it. I'm assuming you're part of a panel discussion and the host. I mean, that's really a happenstance that you were at that conference and then you transitioned into fraud after that completely. Yeah.
yes, and your
Awesome.
description of happenstance is far more accurate than mine. So yes, it just happened to be a coincidence that I was at the right place at the right time.
Correct, correct. So you also talked about your experience in the law enforcement, and you also studied that part of that as well, right? So would love to understand a little bit about one. Obviously, how was your transformation from being a from the government side or the law enforcement side to working in the private sector? I'm sure that was a big, big jump. I'm sure some of them do, but I'm sure that's not a typical career path for a lot of law enforcement people as well. So, would love to understand how that transition happened and how was it personally for you as well.
Yeah, I think, from my experience, folks that retire from law enforcement do look to
Mm,
get into some form of,
mm,
whether it's AML type of work, anti-money laundering, or
yep.
some form of investigative work for financial institutions or insurance companies. That seems to be the career path. Just did the same thing. I just didn't wait till I retired. So I
Mm,
felt it was a good time
mm,
for me,
mm,
to try something
mm,
different. There were some personal reasons
mm,
for making the change, and
mm, mm, mm,
I just I just happened to be again sitting in. I was earning my master's at the time, and my master's is in human resources and business relations. And one of the folks that was in my class, I was working on a project with, and she happened to be an HR manager at the bank that I went to. And we became friendly and working on the projects together. And I got to know a little bit more about the private sector, and it intrigued me. So I said to her at one point during the project, I said, "What would it take to hire somebody like me?" And she said, "No, start with an application." And I said, "Well, that's a good suggestion." So again, just coincidence of meeting the right people at the right time. If I wasn't in taking those classes, and if I wasn't in there, I would not have probably ever even thought about doing something different. It's just kind of what I knew. But then as I got exposure to different career paths and different companies, and sort of, there's a very big difference between how the private sector treats employees and the public sector or government sector treats employees. So I was looking for a better quality of life, and that was sort of what where it took me.
Wow. So this is the second instance where I'm seeing a coincidence actually helps you make a huge career transformation. That's not a small one either, right? I'm sure. I mean, because I think what you're probably not talking about is the people that you interacted with had a huge amount of respect for you. And so when that happenstance or the coincidence happened, it flew right away. So I'm
Well,
sure
thank you
that
for that.
underlying work ethic and respect from your colleagues has helped you. But I cannot not notice the fact that you were open to new things and new directions in your life, and you've taken whatever opportunities that came
I think
across your life.
I think one of the things that helps with that is, in law enforcement, every day I was taking risks. And when you make a career change, you're taking a big risk. And a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. They don't like the unknown, so they're interested, they're intrigued, they're looking forward to something different, but when it comes time to actually making this step, there's often some people just stay paralyzed in the ability to say, I don't know what the unknown is, so I'm just going to stay in what's comfortable to me, and that's not where I operate well. So I'm always looking for something different, something to challenge me. And this space of fraud prevention and fraud detection, I'm amazed at some of the fraud schemes that we see, and I'm like, man, these people are good and they're smart, and you just got to stay, if not ahead of them, you got to at least stay up with them.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, again, I totally agree with that because I think one personality trait that I'm seeing here is, as you rightly put out as well, that a lot of people are uncomfortable with sudden change or an opportunity presenting itself to them, and they're not necessarily either comfortable or not excited by it. But you seem to be flowing with it more naturally, like water. I mean, there was a Bruce. There was a quote that was about, "Be like water. You need to flow like water. Take the least resistance and then just go with it." Right. So you seem to be that kind of a person who just takes what is an opportunity in front of you and not be afraid of it and just go with it. And that seems to be a personality of you, and which also fits perfectly. I mean, you also talked just about it with fraud as well, that because fraud is changing so much, that you also need to keep moving with the fraudsters along with the respect for whoever is doing the fraud as well. So I would love to know more about how your fraud journey has been. What are the kind of things that you have done, and you probably alluded a little bit about what keeps you excited about fraud. Would love to know more about your journey in fraud itself.
Sure. I look back at, I thought we were pretty sophisticated when we were looking at signatures on checks and trying to compare them to other signatures, and nobody writes checks anymore. So my journey starts back a long, long time ago when it was a very manual process. You didn't have some of the technology and the capabilities that exist today. A lot of the modeling, that techniques that are used today, we didn't have. It was instinct. You looked at something and you had to determine whether or not it felt like the type of behavior that this consumer would be doing, and if not, you instinctively had to decide whether or not you wanted to stop that check, block that card, And some of that still happens today, but much more of it is based off of scores and models and matrices, as opposed to, I just don't like the way that looks. So, the instinct piece is still an important part of it, but you can, today leverage a lot of technology and capabilities to help guide that decision. And I think that's what I've enjoyed, is contributing to some of those advancements over time. So, if you can always look at it and say there's got to be a better way, there has to be a faster way, a more efficient, a more costly, or cost-effective way to do something, create efficiency with better results. That's really what my career has been. So whether it was the early days of, as I said, looking at signatures on checks, to coming up with ways to identify identity theft and synthetic fraud, building models and scores, looking at money movements coming in and out of institutions for fraud or AML purposes. Each step that I took, I wanted it to be something uniquely different than the last. So sometimes I see folks that kind of stay in a lane, and they enjoy a career that's focused on, let's say, account opening fraud. So I've done that. I have really enjoyed end-to-end, seeing every aspect of the importance of what upstream does to downstream, and vice versa. A decision that's made over here impacts the performance of something else over there, and being able to balance that across the entire life cycle to create what the customer wants is a seamless experience, with able to use their card or their account freely without disruption, is the total view that I think that my experience has allowed me to help clients get that.
Understand. So you also mentioned that you started in the call center space of the financial services, right? So can I also understand what are the different kind of roles that you've done? You also mentioned quickly about people stay in their lane, but you've been trying to learn more and more things, right? So I would love to know what are the kind of roles that you've done over the years as well.
Sure. I think from a call center perspective, one of the hardest things was coming from law enforcement. I had a face-to-face interaction with people. So you're able to read, suspicious activity by body language and other things. Moving into a call center, that was a very different experience, just to being able to detect suspicion or nefarious behavior when I can't see you. So it was a new skill set that I had to learn. But the types of experiences that I've had, one of the probably first really unique or specialized role was working bust outs. And bust out fraud simply is, consumers that are taking advantage of full credit lines and greater. And you're going back 20 plus years ago. So these were terms that weren't actually called that 20 years ago. It's evolved and it's become more formalized. But, we were looking at that type of behavior and working closely with the credit reporting agencies and the bureaus to understand, look, there are some patterns that we're seeing that you are participating in the development of some of these accounts and some of these behaviors. How can we work with you better? So again, that's not... lots of folks do that in the industry today, but it was new at the time, and we didn't understand how do we treat these customers. So first it was, do we close them down completely? Do we reduce their lines? Do we manage them and monitor their activity differently and only restrict them to certain purchases? That then led into, we have to pay a closer attention to payments. So then I became very familiar with payment activities for, again, one of the ways you bust out on an account is making multiple payments from multiple sources for dollar amounts greater than the balance owed. And I got very familiar with understanding the types of techniques they were using. So that helped me become a payments expert, which led me towards analytics. And from an analytics perspective, helped me understand how to write strategies and rules. And then again, a lot of that was card related. So I wanted to learn the money side. So then that's when I decided again to raise my hand and take on a new opportunity. And again, I'm going back before online banking was a thing. So when online banking became a thing, and we now are having people, instead of coming in and requesting a wire in person or an ACH in person in a branch, now wanting to do it through an online channel, we didn't have anybody monitoring any of these things, right? So I said, we need somebody to monitor this stuff. So let's figure out how to put a team together. and understand what are the risks that we should be looking for and build strategies around them so that we can monitor money coming in and coming out. So again, a lot of the things, because of my maturity, I experienced before they were even a concept. So there was no online banking when I started my career. There wasn't mobile banking. Now, the payment space today is wildly different. There was no such thing as a Venmo and a Zelle and a P2P. So each time something new came about. So I'll give you an example today. Like, I'm really interested in open banking. I'm really interested in generative AI relative to model building. So whatever the new thing is, I tend to kind of gravitate towards. And I think that helps, people like me and people in their career stay relevant. If you kind of stay in a lane, like if I stayed in the Czech environment, I'd be long gone, right? So, from a career perspective, I think it's important to just know what's the next generation of things of importance. I'll give you another example of, I think, one-time passcodes are, quite frankly, going to be a thing of the past. And it's interesting because I work with clients that are trying to get SMS messaging and one-time passcode set up for the first time. Like, it's already outdated. Like, so that's the influence that we're able to put it forward for our clients to say, there is a better mousetrap. What you're doing is new to you, but it's not new to fraudsters. So what else can we offer? Whether it's biometrics through a one-time passcode through biometrics as opposed to a numeric value. Again, that's far more valuable, but it's not widely adopted yet. So we have to help clients understand and how to use it and why that's a better option for them.
Understand. So you talked about Gen AI and few other technologies, right? I also understand. I mean, you mentioned that you are not a technology execution. I'm assuming, but I'm assuming you are using technology as a user all the time. And when you talk about technologies like Gen AI, are you looking at it from learning the technology, or are you looking at it how a fraudster could leverage this technology to come into the system? Are you taking the fraudster's perspective, or are you taking your own perspective to learn this technology?
I love that question, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the things that I hear constantly is, "You would be a great criminal." And I don't know that I don't know that I'm proud of that, but a lot of people say, "Man, you think really differently." So, and I'm not alone in that, right? There's lots of folks that have kind of that. You have to have the dual-minded personality of, well, if I really wanted to get away with it, how would I do it, right? So, but from a Gen AI perspective, I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know that, because again, I'm not a processor or business owner of that. But what I'm most interested in is, today when a financial institution is writing rules or strategies, right? Those rules and strategies apply to a large swath of customers. And not all customers behave the same, right? If you have a customer that travels frequently versus one that shops online frequently versus one, what I'd like to do is see far more segments within strategies so that you can be in a, I'll say, authorization or fraud rules group of people that perform and behave like you, and I can be in a group of customers so that, you can have the best experience that's personalized with your card. And I know, lots of marketing will say, it's personalized, but at the end of the day, I know when you're writing all strategies, they apply to thousands and thousands of people, as opposed to how do you really personalize the experience based off of the customer's not only spend patterns with one bank, but spend patterns overall.
Okay. So you're probably alluding to a concept that I was familiarized a long time ago in analytics, which was a segment of one concept. We talk about segments, right? So you cluster your customers and do analysis, right? So you're probably alluding to segment of one that each individual person has to have not has to have, but more like if you try to segment 2 or 3 people, you're going to lose something.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And you're going to end up having fun. So is that what you're talking about?
It is. Essentially trying to figure out how to give each individual consumer the experience that they want, right? And one of the things that's really, I guess, different from, and again, I work globally with clients, but from a North America perspective, you look at customers have on average, I think it's about 6.5 to 7 cards. So some customers use a card primarily for gas and groceries. And then I use my other card for travel, and I use my other card for this, right? So that's why I think the importance of, well, how do you create the experience that the consumer wants for the card that they have for that particular transaction, which goes back to your segment of one. And I I don't know what that looks like, but I'd like to be involved in shaping that somehow.
This was a concept that came about when analytics and data science was a thing. Not AI, not yet. But when analytics were at least marketing was talking about, instead of doing segments, we should do segment of one. I don't think anybody has ever gone to that, but there was a concept like that was being discussed at some point.
I haven't seen it successful. I've heard folks talk about and seen examples of segmentation, specialized segmentation, but it's not the true concept of what I think the future could look like.
Yeah, got it. So one thing that you touched upon, and probably changing tracks here, is previously fraud fighting or fraud prevention or strategies were more instinctive, that you followed your instinct, right? And now it's more looking at scores and models and stuff like that, right? So one aspect, so there are two aspects, quite a few things that differ in that, right? Going by instinct is fun. I mean, like being a pilot of a fighter jet versus a commercial pilot, right?
Sure.
Because the commercial pilot has to go through all the instrumentation, has to do all the checks and stuff. So it's probably boring as well. I don't know if I'm describing it correctly, right? So I want to understand, because doing things instinctively can be fun as an employee experience, but going through scores and looking and making decisions based on rules that are set can be boring, right? So how do you keep it interesting for at least the fraud analysts or fraud fighters that are out there?
Well, I don't know if I fully agree with the assessment, and the reason for it is it can be exciting. It's just a different kind of excitement. But when you're looking at large data sets and you're like, there's a pattern here, that there's something that they're doing that's causing X, and I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to put something in place to make their lives uncomfortable. It's a different type of excitement. It's not maybe the adrenaline rush, but it is more of a chess type of match of, you're doing something, the data's going to tell me what it is, and then I have to figure out, okay, now what do I do with it? So now I know what it is, but now I have to figure out a way to prevent it from occurring, and how many good customers are going to impact, how bad customers. But I would say some of the biggest fraud events that I've been involved with, some of them massive, millions and millions of dollars. If it wasn't for data, and you could look at the data and I could look at the data, and we both come back with different things. So when I'm thinking of an event that happened a year ago, right? And there were multiple people looking at it. And quite frankly, it's like internal competition. I'm like, I figured it out. We are looking at the same thing I am, but I figured it out. And this is what they're doing. And now let's work together. If we agree that that's what's occurring, let's work together to figure out how to stop it. So it's just a different type of excitement. It's not fighter pilot exciting, but it is a challenge, and that challenge is how quickly can you figure it out? Because if it takes you weeks, a lot of money's getting lost, So it's an adrenaline rush. It's just a different one.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is, so instinct, you're probably going one-on-one person, right? Here, you're probably looking at problem solving and hunting for that pattern that is eluding, basically, right? So you're looking for it, and there's a sense of excitement in actually looking for the pattern itself, right? So different tools, different data, different sort of thing, but there's a sense of excitement. Okay.
But you have to have instinct to look at the data too. You have to have some idea as to what's the end game. Why are they doing what they're doing? Is this the final result, or is this leading up to something bigger? And a lot of times these are precursors to a bigger attack. So,
Cool. So you also touched upon one of the questions that I wanted to go through was time. So you talked about, if you take time to assess what the pattern was, by the time you lose a lot of million. On one hand, you also talked about Zelle and Venmo and things like that. So one is you're talking about real-time payments and fraud, and time being a critical measure, and also time being a customer experience part as well, because people are expecting real time. Previously, ACH, it took 48 hours, so you had time to essentially go back. So, how do you manage the increasing expectations of customers vis-a-vis time that is needed for you to even catch the pattern?
I think I would answer that in a way that's not necessarily not truly time sensitive, right? So for me, the onboarding becomes the important part of that. If you onboard the right people and you're confident that the individual is who they say they are, and you know their history, that they don't have a history of malicious activity per se, then you're working with a trusted individual. So the transactional monitoring becomes, I don't want to say less important, because it's equally important, but where I see a lot of the risks in that real-time space is the rush to, you didn't verify the device, you didn't authenticate the individual properly, there's risks within this consumer that were evident, and you failed to identify, or at least address them if you identified them and addressed them properly. But once they're on the platform itself, then I think a lot of the traditional fraud monitoring, whether, the same techniques exist, whether it's in real time or if it's, a 24-hour ECH. The rules are similar because, why is Chris paying Ravi? Whether it's in a second or in 24 hours, the question's still the same as why is that transfer, why is that money movement occurring? But if you don't know that the recipient is who they say they are and the sender isn't who they say they are, then your opportunities to recover and prevent that become far less. So I think it's more about the onboarding and the identity verification. And then, of course, there are different strategies that you use because there's different data elements in that authorization or that transaction type. But the method of writing, modeling or writing rules, it doesn't change a great deal whether it's like I said, a real-time payment or a 24-hour. The whole difference is your recovery opportunity is far less. So
Okay.
so if you have good recovery and you have good identity verification and device identification and funding sources, that's where I think you can strengthen your program.
Okay. So the time sensitivity is for the recovery part, but not necessarily on the detection or decision or disposition part. Is my understanding accurate here?
Yeah, I mean, if the funds are sent and your recovery window is pretty small, so really small. So it goes back to, is Chris? Is this something that Chris is authorizing? Is the recipient who they say they are? And outside of that, I would say a lot of the techniques that are used, and they're certainly wildly different depending upon the platform, but I don't know that there's any special sauce, I guess, or special rules that are far greater than the other. It's, you use the same modeling techniques, you're looking for the same types of suspicious activity in the transaction. The difference is you just don't have the opportunity to recover it once you hit go.
So if the techniques of detection are similar, you on the few questions ago, you talked about trying to detect the patterns, right? Wouldn't detecting a new pattern come up to a new rule or a new way of detecting it? I don't know if I'm clear with the question. So on one side you're saying that, hey, we are using similar, not we are using, the rules are pretty much similar, right? But there is different patterns happening, and there is an energy in finding that pattern itself. So would a new pattern not create a new rule?
Exactly. So maybe from a verbiage perspective, the techniques are similar, but the rules should be changing constantly, right? It's not a set it and forget it. You're constantly recalibrating rules on an hourly basis. You should be monitoring activity, and depending upon the size of the, but whether it's in real time you're monitoring or at least daily, weekly, but it's never a set it and forget it. So what I'm saying is, yeah, the rules should change, but the techniques of which you apply those rules are similar, because again, you only have so many data elements to work with, so your logic is based off of the elements that are available, and the settings of which you determine one parameter is greater or less of a risk than the other. Those techniques are standard. I don't say standard, but those are more of a moving target than others.
Got it, got it. So you also talked about strategies to fight fraud. Now, I want to understand how a strategy and a pattern or a rule or a technique, what are these elements? How do they all fit together? I'm assuming when you're talking about patterns, you're talking about detecting the mode of operation of a particular type of fraud and then figuring out how to put controls in it to stop it. So would love to understand what is the entire ecosystem and a step-by-step understanding of that strategy itself.
Yeah, and I think that's, from an ecosystem perspective, that's really the way you need to look at it. It's not transactional monitoring, right? It's what are the strategies that are in place today to onboard a new consumer? And that could be the flow itself. In what order is the application being completed? Or what are you verifying versus what are you collecting? So an example, some institutions, they collect information, but they don't verify it. So if you're collecting a phone number and an email address, and you're only verifying the name and the physical address and the date of birth, but then you're going to use the phone number or email for one-time passcodes down the road, well, you're using an unverified phone number and email to do authentication, which is not authentication. So, those are the types of strategies. Say, what information are you going to collect? What's the channel it came in? Is it a face-to-face, a paper, a mail-in? Is it an online application? So, whatever that component is, or that channel is, dictates the information that should be, one, collected, and two, verified. And then the question is, if you're verifying, is it being verified against an independent third-party source, or are you verifying it against something that's not reliable? And oftentimes we see authentication being authenticated against something that's not a reliable source. So what's an example of that? I'll see people do, our clients, doing Google searches and looking on the internet for your LinkedIn profile. Okay, well, I don't know that I would say that that's a independent verified third-party source, right? So there's a profile out there, but so that would be some examples of that. The others is, which fortunately is going away, but in some instances where institutions, one of the rules might be, well, if we can't verify you, we're going to request documentation. Okay, so let's right. So that documentation could be a scanned image, where your government ID is being authenticated through technology, or some would say, well, our strategy is just send us a copy of it, and someone will visually inspect it, and to me, that's not authenticated. It's a scanned copy of a picture. So that's the difference between what you're collecting versus what you're verifying and authenticating, and that's strategy, right? So which customers are going to go out that yellow path that are going to require some form of step up? And that's all driven by, your application strategy. Are you going to send them in the green path, straight to approval, instant issuance? Or are you going to send them a yellow path where they're required to update and provide additional information? Or are you going to send them the red path because you don't believe they are who they say they are and you're not going to request additional information? So, that's from the account opening perspective. Then you get into, okay, the consumer's been approved. Well, then you need PIN strategies. You need plastic strategies. So strategies exist there as well. Right. So how are we going to get this consumer a PIN? How are they going to change the PIN? How are we going to get the plastic in their possession? They want an expedited card request. What do those strategies look like? So, we could continue down the account life cycle into the transactional monitoring, then non-monetary updates. So strategies around, I want to change my phone number. I want to reset my password. I want to change my login. I want to add another user to an account. All of those are strategies. So I think in the broad terms, one of the things that people that don't have a wide range of experience could think of, fraud strategies as transactional monitoring, and that is not what a career in fraud strategies can look like. Fraud strategies can be account opening to, like I said, PIN management, to transactional monitoring, to money movements, to ATM strategies, to non-monetary activity on accounts, to linkage between multiple accounts and looking at the relationship point of view. So, I think what I'm just trying to share with you is, strategies and the data used to build strategies is wildly different depending upon where you are in the life cycle, and that's from a career perspective, gives you lots of opportunity. So there's lots of career paths you can take, as an example. And then you look at your chargeback and recovery. There's all types of strategies around disputes and chargeback and recovery rates, etc. So again, more opportunities to create strategies on what you're going to essentially take as a low dollar write-off, and what are you going to challenge, and how far are you going to challenge it.
Got it. So essentially every process that a customer has as an interaction with the company can have a fraud or a fraud prevention element to it, and it can happen so transaction monitoring is only one part after you are onboarded and you're doing transactions, but you are saying that every process, every interaction that you have with the customer can have a fraud element to it. And I'm assuming that you would probably not put fraud people everywhere. You would probably assess, you would probably analyze the data and say, okay, this part of the process seems where the problem is, and so we should focus here. And if you plug that hole, you have some other hole, and you go there, and I'm assuming you keep doing that all the time.
Yeah, and you can, then the other opportunity is to create different experiences for the consumer intentionally, right? So what level of friction? So you might want to try to log in and look at a query on your account, and we say, no, you got to call in. So you're not going to be able to log in. You're going to get a failed authentication, and then you're going to get a number to call in. And then based upon the number that you call, whether you called the number on the card or the number that we told you to call, will dictate, what treatment you get. So even within just the experience you want to give the consumer to authenticate them by channel is a strategy. You call into the IVR, you might get a live agent, and because you don't have a choice, you're going to get a live agent because they need additional information on you. And I might go through and get automated responses to be able to satisfy my inquiry.
Understand.
That's all strategy driven.
Got it. You also touched upon verified and unverified data, right? And in the last 10 years, obviously, we have seen a proliferation of availability of data, right?
Yep.
So we'd love to understand a little bit about how do you prioritize, because there's just so much data as well. Sometimes it can be noise. Sometimes you also pointed out, like for example, LinkedIn profile. It is data, but it's unverified. It can be fake data as well. That I went and created the profile just for that, so that you can see it, right? So how do you prioritize what data? What do you rely on? What do you not rely on? As more and more data is available.
I think I could answer that from, what excites me is more from a technology perspective, and seeing more and more companies get into fraud orchestration, right? So the term orchestration. So, in my earlier days working for a bank, I'd have 20, 30, 40 different vendors doing different things, right? And the reliance of data coming from multiple sources, especially if it's competing or conflicting data, you have to decide, well, which one is going to be the source of truth, which one is going to be the secondary, makes it very complicated. But what I am really enjoying is working with some of the companies that are, a one-stop authentication hub, right? So
correct.
Whether it's appropriate or not to name some of those particular vendors, but I, as a financial institution, have a relationship with your company, and your company's sole job is to, if I want to verify a phone number, an email, an address, whatever it is that I'm looking for, they have the relationships with the third parties. They're doing the modeling, they're doing the scoring, they're doing the contracts and all of the things that I can get out of that business and just focus on, give me a response based on the risk level that I'm comfortable with, and the response that they provide to me dictates. So more and more, I think customers will get out of the trying to manage all the data
Individual.
and manage all the relationships and relying upon orchestrate companies that orchestrate authentication technologies as a single stop, a single API. That's where I really hope the industry goes. It's
Got it, got it.
expensive,
So,
and that's one of the barriers to entry is the cost of it, but there's so much value in
go.
doing that.
So one final question, I'm also cognizant of the time as well, is what? So you clearly alluded about orchestration, how that can be helpful, right? So you also have been in the industry for some time. So where do you think the next set of challenges or next set of problems around fraud would be in the next few years? I know Gen AI probably is going to be a catalyst to this, but do you have a sense of where we are heading towards?
So I think the authentication that was historically common practice is going to be and should be obsolete soon, right? More
Oh
and more
wow.
consumers are getting comfortable with and the acceptance of biometrics as a form of authentication, right? Whether it's facial fingerprint on your device, whatever, right? So I think biometrics is going to be a different type of data,
Yeah.
right? Best way to say it, a different type of data. So some of the traditional techniques I think will become obsolete, again, trying to stay ahead of the curve, and allowing authentication to happen seamlessly without the consumer even knowing they've been authenticated. Right, so you see it as standalones, as voice biometrics in call centers. You kind of see different ways of which, I've enrolled myself into authentication, by providing my face or something else. But one, there's going to be a lot of privacy and a lot of regulation around what that looks like. It should be as well. But I do think that authentication can become far less frictionless. But I also think that you're going to have different types of experts than you have today, because analyzing and writing a strategy on I am authenticating you based off of biometrics versus I'm authenticating you on historical data is going to be different and exciting too, but it could be different. So, biometrics as a service, for example, is just more and more companies that we're seeing coming out that you're not sending a one-time passcode anymore. You're not sending a numeric value to authenticate. You're receiving a link or a text message, and you're responding to that text via biometric response. So
Got it.
that's a very different type of experience and authentication and data than we've seen historically.
Got it. Got it. Wonderful. Wonderful. That's wonderful, Chris. And few things that I take away from talking to you is one, as a person, I think I really loved the ability for you to navigate those opportunities. I really think that is a great asset that you possess, and I would love if some of the listeners could take inspiration from something like that, because I think opportunity presenting and then going out of the comfort zone is not necessarily natural for a lot of people. I do love that aspect about you, along with the expertise that you are bringing about fraud itself. So thank you so much for your insights today. Also, happy to have talked to you and know you as well.
I'm very, very glad that you had reached out and offered to have this conversation. I've enjoyed it as well, and I just want to thank you for giving me the time and the opportunity to share my story.
Thank you, Chris, and hope to see you soon and have you
Likewise.
again here as well. Thank you.
Thank you.